Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you my May wrap-up where I talk about all of the books that I read in May. I read 17 books last month and I'm going to try and do this in one wrap-up, so let's see how it goes. I'll have content warnings in the description box down below, but without further ado, let's get down to all of the books that I read last month. So one of the books that I finally read and continued on with was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. Emily Henry has just been taking the romance genre by storm. Everyone seems to love her books, and unfortunately that's just not me. I have tried. This is my second Emily Henry book and it was good. I do think I preferred it to Beach Read, but I just don't think I'm going to be an Emily Henry girly. So this one is about an agent and she really is wrapped up in her work. She is so passionate about what she does, but people also see her as kind of cold and brutal, and she kind of has this disagreement with an editor who doesn't take on one of her books when she puts it on submission, and they kind of have a bit of a rivalry going on. She especially feels justified when the book that he turned down goes into like bestseller mode and does incredibly well. But as I was saying, she's kind of a workaholic, and her sister decides to take her on holiday to where that famous book is set so that they can just have some sister time and quality time together, because it's been a while since they chilled out together. And while she's there, maybe the editor ends up being there too. I think that's essentially the plot of this one, and there were some things that I really enjoyed and then some things I was less enthusiastic about, but let's start with what I really enjoyed. And the thing that I enjoyed the most about this book is the main character. I really enjoyed getting to follow her. In some ways she was scarily like me, and being able to relate to her in many ways, how she feels so passionate about her sister, how she really cares about her job, and all of that really worked well for me. Also just her personality, the way that some people think that she's cold, but really she's just, I don't know how to put it, but I think she was just a fantastic character, very realistic, and the way that she learns to not only value her own time but also value spending time with others in terms of sibling relationship or romantic relationship. That quality time is such an important love language for so many people. It's something I really valued seeing develop in her character. I also, of course, really enjoyed the fact that we got to see an editor and an agent doing their jobs, talking about the highs and lows of their jobs. All of that stuff was great and I really enjoyed it. I think because I work in publishing, I was able to see accurate representations of elements of that, and it just enhanced my enjoyment in the book all the more. And now we talk a little bit about the romance here. I actually really enjoyed the first half of this novel. I thought the build-up towards the relationship coming together just felt so realistic, the way that they were skirting around the fact that she had a checklist that she needed to get along to, and that they had this kind of attraction between them within the rivalry. I really like that like spark of heat where they don't go all the way but they're still kind of holding back from each other. I thought that was really well done. And in terms of the steamier elements to the story, where there are only actually one steamy scene in this book, I do think the build-up was better than the actual scene that we got. So the like hinting around, skirting around it, all of that anticipation was done so well in this book. But then we get to the things that I did not like as much, and the main one has to be Charlie, I think his name is, the love interest. I think that, similar to Beach Read, Emily Henry writes Manic Pixie Dream Men. I really didn't get a sense of his character. I know that he's misunderstood, but that's all we really get to know about him, and I think he's just there to say whatever she needed to hear at that time. It was just like his responses were reactionary, his personality was reactionary. He did not stand alone as a character. He just was whatever she needed to hear or needed him to be at that moment, and that kind of led to some inconsistencies in his character that really bothered me and got under my nails, got under my, I don't know what the saying is anymore, got under my skin, that's it. It got under my skin and it frustrated me. Also because he never seemed to volunteer information about himself unless she had volunteered something about herself first. She had to say something personal before he would say something personal back, and that just kind of stilted his character just to, again, being reactionary rather than being his own person. And he was the one who fell so quickly and so deeply in a way that didn't feel believable to me, and it was really strange because that build up when they were resisting each other, I fully believed in their romance, but the moment that they kind of fell for each other, I completely switched off and I didn't really believe it, and I felt like they fell too quickly into love in a way that didn't quite seem like it suited who those characters were meant to be. What was also surprising was that I often love a sub storyline in romance. I often love when there's a grief secondary storyline. I often love when there's siblings in books, and I didn't particularly care about that at all. And I'm not saying the grief storyline was done badly, and I'm not saying that the sibling relationship was done badly, but I was surprised by how uninvested I was in those elements when I usually love them. So a lot of this didn't quite work for me, and the further on we got, the less it worked for me. I do think the grief and the sister storyline had a lot to do with miscommunication, and I often don't pick it up as something that's wrong in a book. I don't hate the miscommunication trope, I don't particularly love it either, but I do think there are things that make it hard for people to communicate, and that's just realistic. However, in this one, I really felt like they could have had this conversation very quickly, fairly easily, but also quite a long time ago, before the setting of this book, they could have had the conversation. So it did bother me, it did get under my skin in this situation. So book lovers, there were parts of it I did enjoy and there were parts of it that I didn't. I don't think I'm going to be reading more Emily Henry. I think it's safe to say that she's not for me, especially if her love interests are kind of similar like this across the board. I tend to like her main female characters, but that's about it for me and Emily Henry. I read a lot of non-fiction this month, and I have to say that this book shattered me. I read Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and I gave it 5 stars, and I don't want to say it's a new favourite, but it is a new favourite in that regard of the fact that I gave it 5 stars. But it's one of these books that I so rarely say, like, you can't rate a memoir, but this was one that I feel very strange rating. But I loved it. It's an incredible book. I've felt such strong emotions. I'm not really an emotional reader in terms that I feel very strong emotions while reading, but this one, it was like the emotions were pouring out of me. The sadness, the anger, the disappointment, the hope. I haven't even told you what this book is about yet. So Know My Name by Chanel Miller is her memoir where she talks about the fact that she was a victim of sexual assault. She is a survivor, and she went through the law system to file claims against the person who assaulted her. And she talks about how it happened in the beginning, the events of that night, what she remembers, what happened, and then she unfolds with going through the court case, which is a brutally long process that takes years, which digs up trauma after trauma. It affects her, it affects her family, it affects her partner, it affects everyone that she's around. But not only is her particular case one that is similar to others that people have experienced but entirely unique to her, it also kind of blew up on social media for a particular reason, and she talks about the like resounding effect of that happening to her with such a personal story, and it just broke me. I read this across 2 months. I could not read this book all in one go. That is how much it was scraping at my heart and ripping it into shreds. The law system, there's just so much wrong with the law system when it comes to supporting the people that they need to support, when it comes to the time that it takes, the money that it takes, and she meticulously rakes through all of the rubbish, all of the awfulness that she has to experience to get or to fight for justice. And it talks about the ways in which justice was served, but also in the ways that it really, really wasn't. And while I'm really focusing on the fact that it really talks about the law system and how grueling it is and all of that, she never fails to also put into this book the emotional account, the emotional toll that it took on all the different areas of her life and the lives of those around her. It's just so clearly written, and while this book may just sound like an emotional gape hole of devastation that you can fall into and then spiral into, I do think it's incredibly well written. Chanel Miller is a writer. She carries you through this book, because for the moments where I felt so completely lost and like life was never going to be good, she also manages to instill hope in you, and I really say that in a really real sense. She also manages to instill community into this book. It talks about the survivor community. It talks about the moments that she felt supported and carried by particular people, by particular groups of people, and even though she was let down time and time again, she really does bring that passion and that love that also was wrapped around her when she needed it to be, even when maybe she sometimes railed against it. I don't think I'm going to be able to justify this book in a review, but I just want you to know that it's fantastic. It's really important, but it is emotionally grueling. Please read the content warnings. Please be gentle with yourself reading this book, but it's just something that needs so much more awareness, and I know we're getting more of that awareness with the Me Too movement, with feminism, with people speaking out, but there's still such a long way to go, and this book is, I think, about 3 years old or something, and I can still see that we have a very long way to go. I think that's all I can say about this one. I finally read Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. This is a literary adult contemporary book where we follow a main character who is black, whose life just seems to be spiraling. She's not doing well with her job, she seems to just be throwing herself at all sorts of men, and everything is going wrong for her. And you basically just follow this character. She's going going through this really difficult period of her life post a breakup, and how she tries to get back on her feet, how she tries to look after herself and her mental health. I think that's all I can really say. I've really been in the mood for stories about black women who are kind of spiraling, who are experiencing a lot of emotions based on their own individual personal stuff that they need to work through, but also it being like emphasized and exasperated by the outward factors of their life, because this book kind of touches on so many things. It touches on the fact that there's gentrification happening all around her in South London, South East London in particular, I believe, and she's also talking about the fact that she is experiencing racism, so many microaggressions, while she is with her white partner, and she seems to throw herself at these men that really don't care about her as a person, that really don't treat her well, but she keeps going for the same men. So I think a lot of this is also about mental health and kind of unpacking that, and how that is different, how the outlook of that is different when it comes to mental health relating to racism, and where it's all kind of intertwined and intersections with different areas of life. This could easily have been like a very lost, unlikable character kind of drifting through life, but there are things that make this book what it is, and I think it's seeing growth of not just our main character, but also seeing it of a lot of the secondary characters, that they've also got to kind of rethink and re-examine their values as they try to support Queenie best that they can. And I appreciated the fact that we see so many people support her. I'm not going to say all of her friends are great, but I really love the friendship group in this one. I really loved seeing them as secondary characters who don't all know each other but all have Queenie in common, rally around each other to support this woman. It was like the greatest show of female friendship and solidarity that I've seen in a long time, and I love that it was like Queenie's friends are diverse, that she's got black friends, she's got white friends, they don't know each other, but they all kind of rally around her to give her advice in the best ways that she can. She's also got family, and of course her family is a bit dysfunctional, they've had some disagreements and they've got things that they're each individually working through, but you can also see that they are still a family that love each other, and I appreciated getting to see that in this book too. I also think this is one of those books that deals with trauma and talks about trauma without re-traumatizing the reader in the process. It mentions its trauma, it implies that there is trauma, but we don't dip back into it, and I've actually been very much into the mood for those kind of books, because I've been reading a lot of non-fiction that really deals with the trauma head on, as you saw with Know My Name. So getting to see that she's got trauma that she's working through, but we're not going to see it on page, we're not going to see that experience, we're just going to learn that she needs to begin to work through it. I appreciated that. I appreciate books that talk about trauma and talk about recovery without needing to dig into it, without having a conclusive everything's happy, everything's perfect at the end, but showing that recovery is a journey. And in some ways the ending of this book was perfect for me. It felt like an ending, but it also felt like a beginning, and I find that very satisfying and very realistic. So I know that some people struggle with Queenie being an unlikable character, but I mostly think that she's just a really realistic character who is hurting, who's trying to be better, and who's failing at doing that in some ways, but needs to keep trying. And the ability to keep trying and have people around you while you keep trying is just so important. I'm not going to be able to do this wrap up in one video, I just know it now. The camera was just too close to me for my liking. So the next book I'm going to talk about is The Secret Barrister, and this is by an anonymous barrister. So this is another non-fiction book that I read, and it's based on UK and British law, and we're following a barrister. Nobody knows who the author is, they're anonymous, and they are talking about what they think of British law systems and why they think the law system is in crisis, and why we should all care about it, and why it's actually a really important thing to think about, to consider, to advocate against when you're considering who you're voting for in politics and where money is going and such. I read this book in between Know My Name. So I mentioned that I read the first half of Know My Name, needed a break, read this book, and then I continued reading Know My Name. And of course Know My Name is based in the US and is set and thinking about US law, while this one is focused on UK law. I think it did a very good job of showing some of the similarities in terms of why the system is failing its victims, why the system is so problematic, but also why the system is even failing those who deserve to be imprisoned and those who are inaccurately and unfairly imprisoned, and how imprisonment may not be the answer for everyone, but there should be other things to help, such as like recovery and rehabilitation and all of that jazz. I think it did a very good job of carrying me. I'm not someone who works within law. I don't know that much about law other than books that I've read, and it debunks a lot of myths that you get from those TV shows like Law and Order and what have you, and it talks about what it is really like, but it also guides you through it. It tells you and explains what every position is. It explains all of the jargon that you might need to know in a way that felt very natural, not patronizing at all. I also really liked how, of course it's all anonymous, but it does use very real cases and outcomes, and sometimes it uses fake cases, and don't worry, every time a case is fake, it tells you that by the end of it, but it shows why and how we believe that those fake cases could happen and how they could be possible based in the systems we have in place. It goes back to history to explain how we got here, but it also talks about law in the future and what it might look like and what we need to change and what we need to do to make the law system not only more effective for the people who have to brutally go through it, the people who are accused of doing things, the people who are victims, but also simultaneously the people that work within the law system. There are not enough things in place to support people who are barristers, to support people who have all those different roles which need to be handled sensitively and with care. And so while it talks about where the law has failed people and individual people have failed people, it also talks about how we can better make it a place that suits everyone. It just felt so important, and it gave me so much knowledge in a very accessible way and entertainingly. Like, it's weird to say that this book felt entertaining in some ways, but it really did. It managed to have some of that prestigious kind of upper talk that you expect in law, and at the same time it debunks it and kind of makes fun of itself, which I appreciated. It was a very witty, that's the word I'm looking for. It was a witty recounting, and it was an informative recounting. The Secret Barrister has done their research, they've put their facts in place, they look at the system, but they also look at the emotional impact that it has on individual people, which is so important for when you're having these conversations, and I just valued this learning experience so very much. I know the Secret Barrister has more books, and I'm very much interested in reading them, educating myself further. That's what you want from reading non-fiction, isn't it? Moving on to quite a different tone, we've got Nothing More to Tell by Karen McManus. This is the proof, but this is what the finished copy looks like. This is a young adult thriller, and recently I've discovered that I do prefer young adult thrillers to adult fiction thrillers, and I thought this was pretty good. I thought it was okay good, and I do have to say I much prefer this one to One of Us Is Lying by the same author. So Nothing More to Tell is about this teenager who wants to get into true crime, and in order to kind of push herself in a job interview that she has, she decides to use an unsolved crime from her own childhood, as she's going to be moving back to that school and would be able to do some first-hand investigating. A murder happened in her town of one of the teachers, and there were 3 teenagers who discovered the body and who were on site, and nobody quite knows what happens. And it's just an unsolved case, and she's very invested, but she also has emotional involvement to the 3 teenagers that were on site. Surprisingly, I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed the setting of it. It was a school that was near the woods, and it managed to capture that kind of woodsy, something happened in the woods feeling, while also getting that academic, something happened in the school, and this was the school drama feeling. And it managed to combine those 2 settings and those 2 atmospheres really, really well, and I never would have thought that they would work so well in tandem, but they really did in this book. I also did like our characters well enough, and I think I liked the characters more than the characters in One of Us Were Lying. They felt like very realistic teenagers, and I will say that some love interesty subplot happens, and I felt like that relationship was really believable and really well developed in terms of rekindling old feelings and the complications that they have there, and I was shipping this romance. I was here for it. I thought it was really well done, and it didn't overshadow the mystery elements of the story whatsoever, and I was pleased by that. I think it can be really hard to find that balance in young adult. In terms of the things that I think could have been better, I do think the mystery itself, I was so interested in it unfolding, and it did that very, very well, all of these clues, and it did a good job of having complexity. I think sometimes young adult thrillers lean too much towards having a simplified mystery so that we get to have more fun with the characters and romance, but this one had quite an intertwined complex mystery with other elements that needed unraveling within it, and I thought it did all of that very well, but the ultimate outcome didn't have enough consequences to its actions as I wanted it to. I wanted there to be more I wanted more drama, a bit more juiciness towards the end. And I do think that solving became a bit abruptly compared to how long it took to unpack and unravel some of the complicated and complex elements to it. The final outcome could have had more time given to it. I also feel like the true crime side of things was dropped fairly quickly. It was all like, I care about true crime, and then she became emotionally invested and connected to the characters, and then she was like, I'm just in it because I care about these people, rather than the true crime element. And I was like, pick a lane, honey. But either which way, I had fun with this and it was a good time. And I think with young adult thrillers, you just want to have fun with it and you want to have a good time, and I did. Speaking about good times, I had such a good time reading My Mechanical Romance by Alexene Farol Follmuth. I gave this 5 stars and it became a new favourite. This is just what I want in a young adult romance book. Oh, I just read so much adult romance and young adult contemporary that I forget that young adult romance is a middle thing that happens and is really enjoyable to read. And so this one, we follow Tio and Belle, and it alternates between both of those point of view. So Tio is really like captain of the robotics team. He's very passionate. He's one of those people that comes from a rich family and he's excelling in school. Everybody expects the most out of him and he serves it, and he's popular, but he's nerdy, and he's just that kind of character. And then we have Belle, who moves into this school, and she comes from a school where nobody had many expectations of her, so she's used to just kind of drifting by. She doesn't feel very passionate or invigorated by anything in life. She's just doing her thing, and it turns out that she's very good at robotics and kind of gets thrown into the team, but she couldn't care less. She's not motivated, she doesn't want to be part of this team, she just happens to end up there, and she kind of outshines some people and they feel some type of way about it. But they're both also dealing with things within their families, they're both also dealing with things within their identities of each other, and it just turned into this fantastic romance that really tackles teenage issues in such a complex and realistic way. So first of all, I have to say, in terms of the robotics, I really enjoyed that storyline. It's strange that I felt so passionate about robotics when I could not care less about it when I was a teenager. I was invested in some of the robotics competitions that they went to. I found that all very suspenseful, and I was like flying through those pages wanting to know what the outcome of these competitions would be, which is so unlike me because I hated physics in school. So the fact that this book could get me excited about something that I don't really know anything about was really exciting to me. I also thought it did such a good job with the women in STEM, especially women of colour in STEM discussion. And Belle is not the only woman on the team, there's another girl on the team as well, and in some ways when you narrow it down to things, you might say that she embodies the not like other girls stereotype, and the girl on girl hate stereotype is in this one too. But I think what it does is it presents those stereotypes to you, and it really does a good job of delving into and unpacking them with the light shone on it of what do you do when you are a girl in STEM. And it talks not just about the stereotypical pushback that you see, like girls doing science, how can they fit in and all of that. It actually talks about some of the microaggressions that women face in STEM that are actually blocking and limiting their journey and path to excelling and just being seen as valid and people who should be there. It kind of talks about some of the more minute elements to it that actually have a big impact, and I thought it did a good job of managing to unpack that. And then of course, while Belle is kind of dealing with all of that pushback and kind of trying to find her place where she fits in, even though she doesn't particularly care about being there, Belle has to be knocked down a peg or two, needs to be able to see some of the sexism that is going on around him, and then has to learn with what he can do to deal with it in some ways. It talks about the divorce element quite well, but it also talks about relationships between parents and how they can be very different in different situations quite well. No one is going to be a perfect parent, I think, and I just really appreciated the way that it showed that, especially when the situation can be quite complicated within divorce, where maybe it's not that they stop loving each other, but maybe one parent has done something that's not agreeable, and like how do you navigate that as a child. Also, Belle as a character, I just think she was so realistic. There are some teenagers that don't feel very invigorated by education, they haven't found what they're passionate about, and they don't really care, and it's about how do you navigate that as not only a teen but also a parent or a teacher trying to support that teenager. I thought that was done very well. It talks about success and failure, and I think it handles both of those topics very well. Not only that our main character doesn't get everything that she wants, but neither of our main characters get everything that they want, and they have to learn to deal with the fact that they can succeed and they can fail. And I'm not just talking about within the competitions, I'm talking about in other elements of their lives too. And I think sometimes we fall into the thing like, there's a big competition and then they win it at the end, like in all those dance films, they win the competition or they lose that competition but they win in other elements. But there's so many different ways that you can succeed and fail in life in smaller, minute sections, and seeing that represented in this book was actually really nice and felt very realistic and true. I was satisfied. I was satisfied. This book just, and I haven't even talked about how cute the romance was. It was just like seeing them grow into each other and kind of start to enjoy each other's company and test each other's boundaries and find where they could fit in with each other. It was so sweet, and I felt like their personalities just did such a good job of intersectioning. And I'm not always a big fan of rivals to lovers, and I don't actually believe that this book is rivals to lovers in some ways. I did just really like how their relationship panned out. I felt like it was realistic, I felt like it was cute, and I had such a good time with this book. 5 stars, touched on so many things, balanced all of these themes really well. Excitement, love, love, love. Clearly I need to read more books by Olivia Blake. Her fantasy, here I come. Take it to the middle grade now. So I read Melissa by Gino. This is a book about a young girl who is transgender, and she kind of discovers that she's transgender. She's learning how she feels, and she wants to start telling the people around her, and she's not sure how best to do this, and she decides that she wants to audition for the role of Charlotte in her play, in her school play, and kind of show people that she is a girl, that she is who she is. I read this I read it across 2 days because I started it in my Patreon sprints and I finished it the next day in a park, and it was just so affirming. It was just so affirming to read this journey, to see it on the page. It just felt very like, yes, I'm so glad that this is out there in the world. I'm so glad that people will be able to read this, like young children, and maybe be able to see themselves and see that trajectory and see that journey. And I don't actually have too much to say about this because I read it very quickly, and it's just one that you can blitz through, but it's really just about trying to tell people who you are and understanding that not everyone will accept who you are, but you can still keep pushing for it, you can still keep vying for it, and you can still keep being yourself. It's not a reason to stop being yourself. And I appreciated getting to read that as a young child. Like, she's really figuring it out the best way that she can. There's also a lovely friendship in this one, and I really just, the friendship was so heartwarming and wholesome, and I think it did a good job to show that there will be people who will support you and love you no matter what and be with you along that journey. And I think for children that's really affirming to read and will be very assuring for some people to read. What I also appreciated about this book was that you get to see adults learn, because in some ways the adults in this don't always have the best initial reaction, and maybe they don't have the best reaction overall, but they've got to learn how best to support the people, how best to support that child, and how best to overcome some of their own internalized issues to be able to best be a good parent, be a good teacher, be a good head of the school. So I just really liked seeing all of that unfold in this book, even though it's very short and very wholesome. And in some ways, I've said this before in this vlog, but in some ways this feels like an ending, and in some ways it feels like a beginning, and that is life, that is realistic, and I liked it. Really good. A book that really surprised me this month was The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex. This is one historical fiction book with a lightly mystery element to it that I thought, I think I might like this, but I don't think I'm going to really enjoy it. And then I blitzed through it and I read it in a few days, and I had such a good time. In The Lamplighters, we are following this case where 3 men are on a lighthouse and they're doing their duty and they disappear without a trace. No one knows what happens to them, and this book focuses mainly on the wives of those men who were in the lighthouse and what happened to them immediately after the events of all of their husbands going missing, but also what they're like now. Do they believe that their husbands are still alive? Are they still friends or not? How are they coping with their mental health, with their disappearances? Some of them have families. What does it mean for them now? Where are they? And reading the synopsis of this book, I really thought it was going to focus more on the men, and it was such a pleasant surprise for it to focus on these 3 women and how they are recovering, rather than it being spotlighted on the mystery. And I'm not saying the mystery in this is totally ignored, because you do get to see from the men's perspectives. The chapters are kind of interspersed with what happened at the lighthouse back then, but also where the women are now and how they're dealing with this situation. So you do get to see a bit of both, but I was especially appreciative of how much time was given to the wives, and also that it was mostly their story. They mostly carried everything. The voices of these three women were so unique to each other. I love that they were all in slightly different situations, that they all had slightly different beliefs. But this book in some ways is mixed media, because yes, there's prose, yes, there's diary entries, but there's also the interviews that the women have with a particular author who's kind of investigating into their situation. And because of the fact that you get those interview chapters, they really like come to life with their way of speaking, with their mannerisms, and I just thought the character building in this was done so very well and so realistically. It has dramatic elements, like there's drama going on between the wives and how they relate to each other or don't relate to each other, and that was entertaining to see, because you get a bit of like, there's a bit of drama here, there's very strong characters here, but there's also a mystery here, and I was satisfied with the mystery and how we saw that unravel, and how in some ways I thought it was a very dual way of writing this, because in some ways the reader is left knowing more than certain characters are left knowing, and I liked that we get answers, we get conclusions, but at the same time we don't get answers and we don't get conclusions, and I think that was just such a smart ending. And I will always appreciate this book for being smart, for being realistic, but also for just bringing to life characters within a story. Really well done, really recommend this. And the last book that I'm going to talk about in this wrap up is a picture book. I was on my Patreon reading sprints and I mentioned how sometimes I read picture books and I don't actually mention them in my wrap ups, and I need to stop doing that. I just need to talk about some really good picture books because I'm reading a lot of them, especially as I'm trying to like, I call it proofreading, like reading the picture books ahead of giving them to my future niece or nephew, but I'm just reading picture books because I enjoy it. So I'm going to talk about the Christmasaurus picture book by Tom Fletcher and illustrated by Shane Deveries. I've talked about the Christmasaurus books on my channel before. I adore them. They are a very good series, and I'm so happy that there's a picture book out there for younger readers. I gave this book 5 stars. I adored it, and I read it very quickly because it's a picture book. So as you can see from the cover, it's about a Christmasaurus, a Christmas dinosaur, and the secondary character in this one is William Trundle, who we know from the main series, and he is a wheelchair user. Note that the author is not a wheelchair user himself, but I do think it works for this book because it's nothing to do with the fact that William Trundle is in a wheelchair. It just so happens that he is, and he's also a character in this book. So this one, I want to say, falls out of the series in terms of the fact that it doesn't fit into the main trilogy. You don't need to read the main trilogy to be able to read this. It doesn't really have a connection to those other than we're following the same characters. And in this one, the Christmasaurus just kind of wants to be able to help Santa with his sleigh, and he's unable to because he doesn't know how to fly. And so this book mostly focuses on believing in yourself, but also being able to believe in others, and how believing in others can help them believe in themselves too, which I think is just a really lovely message. It also has a lot of the Christmassy vibes to it because it's about a Christmasaurus, so it's got all of the Santa and Christmassy good things and all about belief and believing in yourselves and believing in other people, and it's wholesome and it's lovely. It's entirely written in verse, so by that I mean it all rhymes, and it all rhymes very naturally, and it flows quickly, and it reads easily, so it's one that's kind of got a sing-song vibe to it when you read it out loud to children. I also thought it was printed wrong, but it's not printed wrong, and I thought it was printed wrong because this page is like, there are pages where it feels really thick, but just so you have a heads up, it's because the pages open out like this. So some of the pages you can open out longer, which I think is just lovely for children because it gives it a bit of extra interaction. Not every page is the same. Shane Deveries is a fantastic illustrator. I've talked about this with the main series, but the colours in the picture book are lovely, and Shane Deveries is the best illustrator of smiles in my opinion. Seeing the characters smile in this make me smile out loud, like in real life when I read it. So all I can say is beautifully illustrated, really lovely, and I recommend it to teachers, parents. Just go and get it and read it and make all of the children happy. We need more and more books, picture books with disabled rep. I will never stop pushing that. We need more and more of it, and so I would love to see more by disabled authors out there, but it's also nice just to see some visually on the page. And I think that is going to be it for part 1 of my wrap up. I thought I could do it all in one, but why did I believe that? I talked too much. But yes, please let me know in the comment section down below what was the last book you read and enjoyed. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!